Hey friends, and welcome back to the podcast. So what you're listening to is episode 3 in our Admission Nutrients series. So quick context, if you haven't heard the earlier episodes, last year, my colleague Tom and I spent some time analyzing hundreds of college websites to find out what exactly our college is looking for. We boiled it down to a set of what we call nutrients. Now, these are qualities that are important for a healthy college admission process, but guess what? They're also healthy, we believe, for a well-lived, meaningful life. On this episode, we're delving into the qualities of leadership and initiative. And my guest is Deanna Dixon, the Dean of Admission at Smith College. In our conversation, we get into a bunch of things, including some of the qualities that Smith looks for when they're evaluating applicants. We talk about how their particular supplemental essay points to the college's institutional priorities and what those are. In short, how can we know what they're looking for in an applicant based on what the essay is asking for? Then we talk about why leadership and initiative are important from Smith's perspective, what Deanna thinks about ChatGPT, how she feels like the profession is doing when it comes to equity and leveling the playing field, and then she offers some great advice for students and families who are going through this process. Deanna has worked in college admissions since 2006 and currently serves as Dean of Admission at Smith. As a women's college graduate, she's maintained a deep commitment to women's education and college attainment for marginalized students in general. A parent of a college senior, Deanna appreciates the dedication of college counselors and the shared partnership of matching students to the best school for them. Deanna has a bachelor's degree from Smith College and a master's degree in business administration from the Olin School of Business at Washington University in St. Louis. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Deanna. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love folks to get to know what you do a little bit. And I sent you this list of roles and identities, which is from a separate exercise that we sometimes give to students. But I'd love for you to just maybe pick a few of these roles and give us a sense, because a lot of folks don't know what a Dean of Admission actually does. So what are some roles that you play as Dean of Admission at Smith?
Yeah. I think the first word that resonated with me when I looked at this long list, words that really could describe what I do, the first word is, which technically is 2 words, is decision maker. I think day to day, I am making some kind of decision, clearly just by the nature of my title, Dean of Admission. One of my biggest decision-making opportunities is to work with a team of people to decide who's being admitted, right? Decide, whatever the admission decisions are. But even outside of that, it is, strategic decisions. It is, I just helped someone today with making a decision based on our admitted student program. So decision maker resonates probably the most. After that, I think I have 2 words that I'm combining because I think they go together.
Great.
You have them separate as leader and also learner. And I think that they go together. So I think in my role as leader, being Dean of Admission, I clearly lead an office. I am, considered a leader on campus, but I also see myself in many ways as a learner. I am open to learning, about the things that I don't know, but also learning, different ways of thinking. I'm learning from my team. I'm learning from my bosses all the time. And I think learning makes you a better leader. So I think I read the 2 of those words as coming together. And then, this is going to probably surprise you, but this is one of the ways that, I don't know that I would use this word, but it describes what it is a validator. And the way I see that is, I feel like, and I'm like this in my personal life. I have a daughter who's 22, graduating from college this year, yay. And I feel like my role as validator kind of spans my work life and my personal life. I feel like people need to be validated in, decisions that they are making, things that they are thinking about. And I feel like a lot of what I do is validating others.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you are the decision maker and one of the decision makers in terms of sending out acceptances to students. I know that you've just, because we talked about this whenever last week or the week before, you've just sent out acceptances. You're hearing back from students right now. Assembling the class is what, sometimes we call this. What does that work look like this week? And just for folks who are listening, we're recording this in between when acceptances were set out and when students have to decide, which is usually May 1st at many campuses. So what does life look like? Take us behind the scenes at Smith.
Well, one thing that's really big in our work that's a little bit beyond the big bulk of decisions that you're referring to is our transfer admission process. So after we finished our regular decision, we moved right into, it kind of is an overlap a little bit, moved into the transfer process. And I'll include in that, we have a program called the Ada Comstock Scholar Program, which essentially is a transfer program for the non-traditional age students. So they kind of go together, but they're treated a little separately. But going into that process, and so we are just really finishing that this particular week. So in some sense, that work hasn't really ended yet, right, and will about to end. So the other piece that's really behind the scenes, and this will also be related to the transfer process when we get to that point, is talking about our yield programs in the month of April, which is where we are now. So, we have a couple of opportunities for admitted students and families to come, visit Smith and check us out. And there is a lot of work. There's a team of folks who work specifically for those programs, but they require, a lot of support in, making sure that those programs are executed properly and the way that we want, and that, our students and families are happy when they're here and they leave happy. So a lot of work goes into that. So that has been a big part of the behind the scenes. And that's where kind of the decision making, as I referred to earlier, comes into play. Also, problem solving kind of relates to decision making. We also, as part of that, we have our on-campus programs, but we also have a virtual admitted student program component. So part of, what I'm doing specifically is, I am moderating a virtual panel tomorrow of faculty to talk about our open curriculum. So a lot of the behind the scenes is really kind of preparing for the big, enrollment piece that finishes the actual admission cycle. So of course, with this cycle, the overlap is also with, also beginning to recruit again. So, the recruitment cycle kind of overlaps with the end of the reading and yield cycle. So all of that is happening now.
For folks who are listening and may not know what yield is or understand it, will you just give us a quick definition for what yield is and say why it's important to colleges?
Yeah. So yield is essentially, we've admitted students, and we hope that, the students that we admit will want to come. And that's essentially what yield is. It's like how many of the students that we admitted are choosing to enroll. So, you'll hear yield rates and just the concept of yield season. That's the time that, we are, it's like things are in the students are now in the driver's seat, right? Because we've admitted them, and we have said we love you, we want you to choose us, and now they say, okay, well, let me think about it.
Right. And because students may not know this part, or parents may not know, why is yield so important from a college perspective? Like, say a college accepts, I'll just pick a number, 100 students. It's not 100. Why is it important that as many of those students say yes? Like, how does that go from the college perspective?
Well, it ensures that we have a class, right? And so, each class, right? The class of, 25, right, is graduating, in May. So yield is what determines that we have, we are meeting the enrollment goals of the college, and that we have a class that we are going to welcome to campus, come fall. And that's why yield is so important, because the college is depending on the admission office to have a class of students for our faculty to teach, and for Smith to, create community around. So yeah, that's why yield is so important.
Great. So last year, there was a separate podcast series that we did on what colleges are looking for. And one of the qualities that colleges look for is something called positive character attributes, which is kind of a broad, vague term. I'd be curious, I'd love for you to take us behind the scenes a little bit at Smith. What are some of these quote unquote positive character attributes that Smith is looking for? Maybe give us a little behind the scenes of how Smith reviews students.
I'll talk about three things, actually. And I think, a couple of those things will speak directly to that question. I can't, answer kind of what Smith is looking for without acknowledging academic excellence, right? Which may not be directly tied to what your question is. But first and foremost, we are looking for students who have in their high school curriculum have, shown that they will be able to come into a rigorous classroom that Smith has and be able to handle the academic work. And they're able to contribute to the classroom and all of the things that are academic. So academic excellence, for us is, really this combination of rigor and achievement. So our students, taking a rigorous set of classes that are available to them in their high school, and what kind of achievement have they shown in those classes. The other two things, the first of the two other things that are important to us is how involved the student is. So we value that students are involved in whatever their life is outside of the classroom. So it could be things that they are doing in their residential community. It could be their activities in a church, a temple, or a synagogue, that kind of activity. It could be that they are responsible for taking care of younger siblings, and they have a lot of household responsibilities. What that is telling us about a student, in addition to things that they might do, what you think of as extracurricular activities, so clubs and organizations and things that they might belong to, is that tells us about what kind of community member they're going to be at Smith. So we want to, just have an idea of how likely you are to engage in community here. And then the other thing that may get more to what you're talking about within your question is we are looking for, or what we like to get a sense of is, I'm just going to kind of describe it as cultural competency. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, or let me kind of describe why that's important. It's important for us in particular because we have a housing system or residential life at Smith that, we have students who live in, what we call houses. They're not your typical dorms. So what's important to us is that you are a good house member and you're a good roommate. So we are a diverse campus. So we want to get a sense of how well you would engage with people who are different from you. So that's what I talk about, kind of this cultural competency. How interested are you in exploring some of these differences? And can you, do you have the capacity to engage in a conversation that shows that you are, interested in exploring what some of those differences might be? So I think that's important to, be a part of the Smith community. So in terms of kind of, those characteristics that we would look for in an application, that's kind of, describes the types of things that we would be looking for.
Right. Yeah. It seems to me that it's pretty clear that academic excellence, in terms of rigor and achievement is going to show up on a student's GPA, maybe also in their recommendation letters. The student involvement is going to show up in the activities list, maybe a little bit in their essays, maybe in their rec letters. When Smith is evaluating, where do the admission readers look for cultural competency? Where does that show up in an application?
That's a very good question. It shows up it shows up throughout the application in different ways, right? It certainly does show up in, say, a recommendation, depending on the student, obviously. It does show up in a list of extracurriculars, but we also ask a question on our application, which is you might think of it as a supplement question. It's actually a member question, of the Common App, although, this question is also part of our application platforms on the Coalition application as well. But it essentially puts applicants in kind of our housing environment. It describes what's important to us in our housing community and asks them essentially, what would you contribute to a house community and what would you take away from the house community? So it's just the intention of the question is to get at, this type of answer. And it's interesting, the type of responses we get. I mean, some responses don't exist. It's actually a hard question to answer. It takes some thought. And so it's not a question that you probably could have prepared for another school. So it's not like a why Smith question, but it is very Smith specific. And I think a student might have to do a little bit of self-reflection in order to answer the question. So we get a variety of answers. We get a lot of answers to that question that relate to food and, kind of the cultural significance of what a particular food or food in general might mean for that student. It might be a reflection of how that food is kind of connects them to like their grandparents. I mean, that kind of thing. So the answers to the question might not directly say, this is how I'm showing cultural competency, right? So it is up to the reader to interpret some of the things, including, say, this food answer. And what does it mean for a student to talk about, their connection to this particular food and how, culturally there's a connection. It could be, somebody who talks about how religion is important to them and how, they're bringing that to the house community. So it really can be up to the reader to interpret what we're reading. And then, of course, there are some students that really, it seems like they don't have, a lot to offer to that answer. But I will say, even for those students, this is just one element of the application. So even say a quote unquote bad answer to that question is it's not going to ruin somebody's chances.
Great. Yeah. I want to, for folks who are listening and who aren't familiar with this prompt, as many folks won't be, I'm going to read it out loud. And by the way, whoever's listening, know that this is not necessarily, the prompt could change. Prompts change from year to year. So if you're listening to this in a future year, just make sure you check the Common App or check the Smith website to make sure it's still the prompt. But it goes, Smith has a unique housing system where students of all class years live together in 41 different houses. With our residential curriculum, students will become critically aware, global neighbors, exploring their self-identity by living in community, engaging in reflection, and challenging their own beliefs. What personal experiences, background, or abilities would you bring to this residential environment to share with your neighbors, and what would you hope your neighbors would share with you? Now, you've already hinted a little bit at, how this connects to what Smith is looking for, and I'd love to just look at it through the lens of institutional priorities. So for those who are listening, institutional priorities are like specific things that a college is looking for, broadly speaking. How does this question point to Smith's institutional priorities, and how does it give us some clues about, what those are? And how does it help Smith decide if a student's going to be a particular fit for the college?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of hearing maybe two questions there.
Yes, totally.
I'll try to let's see, which one did I want to address first? Maybe the fit piece. And I think I do want to kind of take a little aside, I guess, and talk about this concept of fit. Because, we hear about, fit a lot. I mean, we use it. Smith uses it, Smith fit or fit with, we tell students to think about, their fit. I just want to acknowledge that sometimes there are negative connotations with the word fit. And it could maybe be perceived as, meaning that we are looking for students who are fitting in, which could be interpreted as really exclusive instead of, inclusive. When fit really just means that, are there things about, is there a match there that from the student point of view, are there things about this school that make you feel like you can thrive there? Is the school meeting all the things that are important to you? And I think thriving is a big piece of that. So for us, from the Smith perspective, fit, I think, can be more aligned with, kind of the context of our mission. which, in briefly would be to educate women of promise for lives of distinction and purpose. So, how are we, reading an application or learning about a student that can help further our mission, right? That's how they fit, right? They are, helping us, further our mission as it relates to that house community, which is where that question, is talking about. And again, it just kind of talks about engaging with, as it relates to mission, engaging in these complex conversations, those that can, test one's tolerance for difference, right? In a global sense. So that would fit, our mission of, educating women of promise. That could be academic promise. That could be really a leadership promise, right? Students who have shown leadership, and certainly for lives of distinction and purpose, and how we get there, or how we have a community that moves the mission forward, is that, those are things that are important to be, a full citizen of the world, right? Being able to relate to others, engage in these complex conversations, and be able to learn from each other. So that's kind of that fit piece in terms of how we, kind of using these questions to get to that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you had asked about was institutional priorities. And for us, one of our institutional priorities really for a long time has been to, maintain and grow diversity on campus. And diversity in this sense is really broad. So I certainly do mean racial and ethnic diversity, but I also mean socioeconomic diversity, geographic diversity, religious diversity, diversity of thought, right? So all things that are, under the, what you might call diversity. And, for us, it's like, the more people who gather or who are in our community who are different from one another in any aspect, the more we can learn, the more insights that we can gain, that we can grow in our perspective, learn different perspectives, because that is the value of living and learning with a diverse, group of people. So I think this question then helps us get to that, because the answers that we read and what we are learning about students is really vast. It's a wide range of, what we're learning about students that help us really get to, to these things.
I'd love to talk a little bit about leadership and initiative. And why is that important from Smith's perspective when evaluating applicants?
I think you have to, again, not exactly going back to mission, but I am going to, refer to Smith as a women's college. And as a women's college, we are, certainly mindful of, where women were not included, right? So we are righting a wrong, historical wrong, by educating women. And as a matter of fact, Smith was founded by Smith. What Sophia Smith wanted was to give women an education that was on par with what men were getting at that time. So education-wise, women were not included in spaces where, say, an educated man would be. So if you take that idea of how Smith was founded, of course, leadership would follow, right? Because, we still need women leaders, and there are still spaces where, there is a lack of women leadership. So, based on kind of the type of institution that Smith is, of course, it is like a natural progression that not only are we educating women, but we are also inspiring leadership and kind of, giving opportunities to develop leadership. So that is the crux, I think, of why leadership is important for us.
I'd be curious to hear, based on the applications you've seen over the years, are there any interesting or unconventional examples that you've seen of students taking leadership? Because I think sometimes students think of it as like, I have to be president of this club or president of the student body, and there's sort of like leadership means X. I wonder if you could just give some examples of what leadership has looked like over the years when, from the high school student perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and those things are true.
Right.
So yes,
It's a yes and.
that we think of, the president of the club or the team captain. I mean, those things that kind of say leadership, they have leadership in the name. Those things are important. But we also see leadership in some of the things that some students have done. For example, I think I've seen this a couple of times where students will say, I was so mad about the dress code at my school that I, changed it. But how did they change it? They had to figure out how to, get some support for that and talk to the right people. And, lo and behold, the dress code then changes. That's leadership on a high school level, on any level, actually. If you take somebody who finds something that they're uncomfortable with and they, take the actions to change said thing. I mean, that is leadership. We do see that kind of activity on the high school level. We see, I'm going to mention Scouts. I'm saying Scouts, Girl Scouts are,
Right.
still in existence, but Scouts, right? Because, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts are kind of, in some areas together. But I think we see leadership in Girl Scouts, students who have, gone on to get their Gold Award. I mean, that is showing leadership to us that not everybody has the opportunity or has the experience of being a Girl Scout. The other place where we see it is we see students who are actively involved in political campaigns. So they're volunteering in those areas. So to us, it is, again, an example of, kind of going after something that's important to you, and you're taking an action step to work towards, some kind of change that you're looking for. And then there is, maybe along the same lines, is social justice leadership. I mean, we have, many students in our applicant pool who, again, are righting a wrong, and they are active, activists. They're social justice activists, and we see that on the high school level in many of our applications too. So those are a little bit of what we see outside of what you can clearly see as leadership in the title of a captain or president and so forth.
Yeah, love that. I love what you're sharing. So I'd love to pivot for just a second to talking about leadership, because as you know, we ran this big analysis of what colleges are looking for. We looked at hundreds of websites and synthesized and found that leadership and initiative is something that a lot of colleges look for in the application. Why is leadership and initiative important from Smith's perspective?
For Smith in particular, I think leadership shows up in lots of ways. One way, I mentioned our house system earlier. That is actually one way that leadership does show up. Our houses have leadership roles in them. So our houses are self-governed. So there's opportunities for students to develop leadership skills by taking on roles just right in their house community. So this is kind of beyond what might be more campus-wide. So in that case, I would say students here, they live leadership. We also more or less include students pretty much in everything that we do. So if we have a committee of sorts, including like a hiring committee even, I mean, things that are really at a senior level, there typically is a student that is sitting on the committee as well. I'm thinking of a committee that I'm on right now. I sit on what's called the campus use planning group. There is a student that is sitting on that committee. So we actively let students or give students an opportunity to make some broader decisions that are impacting others on campus. So, I would say that, at Smith, students, really kind of live leadership. I would also say that here, students learn leadership. So we have, opportunities through, that are kind of co-curricular. We have what's called the Wordle Center for Leadership. that where leadership's right in the name, right? That really has a curriculum that teaches leadership or leadership, things that fall under leadership, like team building, right? Kind of, navigating conflicts on a team. I mean, those are examples of some of the things that our Wordle Center is teaching. I would say not only students, but just the community, because faculty and staff can benefit from that as well. But that center also offers, instruction on public speaking. So thinking of, kind of the public voice as a form of leadership. So that's, kind of, how we're teaching leadership. And I can't kind of finish this answer without recognizing that we model leadership. So, so at a women's college, Smith in particular, I mean, not every higher role is held by a woman, but many are. So our president is a woman, many of on our president's team or our vice president level are women. I mean, the dean of admission's a woman. That's me.
I mean, for example.
So my point is that, you see it around you.
Right.
So when you're here, it's like, you are not in an environment where you think you can't do because you're seeing it done. And that just in and of itself is, I don't know, it's a great place to be just to see that modeled, because when you see it, you can be it. And then that's what it is.
I'd be curious to know, over the years, what have you seen shift in terms of what students are writing about in their college essays? And I'll give you an example. Years ago, it seemed like, especially before COVID, there were a lot of mission trip essays. A lot of people writing about mission trips and doing that. And then COVID hit and nobody was going on mission trips. And I haven't seen a huge resurgence in that, but I'd just be curious in terms of what you see students writing about in their personal statements. Maybe what's changed?
That's interesting, because I would agree. I'm not seeing a lot of mission trip answers. But I also wonder, it almost feels like our students who are applying to Smith might be digging a little deeper. Of course, if they're applying through the Common App, then other schools would have similar answers, right? Because, everybody's getting kind of the same answer. I think, generally speaking, students are really interested in telling us about their personal growth. And I say that because we read a lot about students' mental health. And, of course, there might be some connection to the pandemic related to that. But I think students are, they want to be open about their mental health challenges and how they've overcome them or are continuing to overcome them. And they're telling us that. And I think it's important to them to tell us that. And so I think that's changed.
Yeah. And I'd love to stay on that for a minute, because this is something that I've heard from other, deans, directors of admission, that there are a lot more students writing about, for instance, anxiety and mental health. What have you seen, work well when it comes to students writing about mental health challenges? What have you seen work less well?
I think what works well is a student who, if they want to, tell us that kind of information, because, some might feel like that's also very personal and private. But I think what works well is for students to tell us how they are thriving, how they are. And I'm saying, I'm not trying to put their anxiety or whatever the issue is. I'm not trying to put it in the past. Right? Because there are some things that maybe someone has recovered from, right? Or they're recovering. And maybe that's it. It's recovering. And what is a student doing to recover? How are they helping themselves? What resources have they taken advantage of to help them? Because I think ultimately what we're looking at through this essay is, can you come here? Right? Can you live in a residential community and have the, a few things: maturity, become healthy, know when to seek help when you need it. Do you have those things because then you might need to rely on those things, when you come here. So I think that kind of writing can be done well. And then I guess just the opposite. What doesn't work well is that when you kind of leave us with I'm not so sure they're ready, right? Because we want to know you're ready, right? Are you ready? And then, if what you're writing about shows us that maybe you're not quite ready, then that writing, that essay, that personal statement isn't as effective.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here. And one of the things that I'm getting from what you're sharing is a permission giving for students who have faced, challenges and who want to write about it. So that students do have permission to write about it, provided that they're speaking about their growth and, like you said, how they're thriving. But I'm also hearing, what, you really don't have to. And, I think we both agree here that students don't have to write a challenges-based story in order to write an interesting personal statement. And one thing that many students don't realize is you could, for instance, put your challenges, mental health challenges or otherwise, in this additional information section.
That's absolutely right.
And then write your personal statement on something else, right?
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because I don't want to leave the impression that I am encouraging people to write about that.
Yeah. Right.
What I want students to write about what they want to write about.
Right.
But to your point, yes, know that there is an area on the application where you can tell us this piece of you without writing a full personal statement or essay about it. And maybe there is something else about you that you want us to know. And you're going to use that space, that essay space, to tell us that, because maybe that thing isn't anywhere else in the application. And then use that shorter section for kind of, and by the way, I want to name this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, a challenge that I have, that I've overcome or recovering from, or whatever the word is. But I'd say, if that is important for you to share, there's nothing that mandates that you have to, say things that you're not comfortable with sharing. You have to be, it's what you want to share with us.
Deanna, I'd love to know what's a favorite essay that you've read over the years that stayed in your mind?
My favorite essay, and this is going to be a cliched essay. I'm just going to admit, some of the things that we say, well, don't write about, winning the big game, right? That might be of the category, don't write about those because, that's not all that interesting. And, other people are going to write about like winning the big game. But I read an essay, this is years ago, so I'm still talking about this essay. Mm-hmm. She was, a cross-country runner. And she was taking the reader through a particular race. And the way that she captured what she was thinking and feeling, and even creating kind of the sound of her feet hitting the pavement, was so well done that you felt whatever it was she was describing in this moment. But in this whole day in the life idea, it really was just kind of a race that I don't even think she won. But it wasn't even about winning or losing, right? In her essay, it was about this particular experience. Might have been what she was thinking about, I don't know, but it gave us an idea of who she was. And it was just so well written that I still kind of think about it. And this was it's so many years ago.
So what would you say to folks, students, maybe even parents who are listening, who have the belief that a challenges essay is quote unquote better, or that's what colleges are really looking for?
It's kind of cliche, unless you are answering the prompt that says, tell us about a failure, right? Because that could be a challenge. That could be used as a challenge essay. But I think the Common App gives so many choices for how students can, choose to tell us whatever it is that they want to tell us in the essay form, that I think that alone tells parents and students that you don't have to choose the challenge question. There are other prompts that are just as valid and are, kind of Common App worthy. I'll just put it that way, that institutions are receiving as part of, the essay answer.
Totally. So one thing that some students are using is ChatGPT. They're using AI to write their college essays. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on ChatGPT?
Honestly, I haven't given a lot of thought to it. And I say that because in the world of college admission, higher ed, there have been, in the last couple of years, so many bigger things to contend with that, ChatGPT or just AI in general has in my mind, sure, it's something maybe we need to talk about more, but it has paled in comparison to some of the other challenges that we've had in the last couple of years. And I'm specifically, talking about the SFFA decision that means that we cannot use race as a singular factor in our admission decisions is a big one. We've had the financial aid crisis with the FAFSA form, a year ago. So, it seems to be, one thing after another kind of piling up, that we've had to contend with. So with AI, I mean, what I would say is that, we know that students and teachers and counselors.
Right. That was a recent episode. Once folks are listening, there's a previous episode on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool though, right? It's a tool. And, I am in the camp of, those who believe that in a sense, ChatGPT has almost leveled the playing field, right? For students who in the past, and still now, may not have great college counseling or, or they might not have a tutor or somebody to read their essay. I mean, those kinds of things. And then we have students who, they do have that. They have benefited from having, kind of that one-on-one, read my essay, give me feedback and, all of that. So with the assumption that, ChatGPT is available to, everyone, then in that sense, it kind of levels the playing field in that way. Do we want to have essays and student writing, kind of written by ChatGPT? No, we don't. I mean, I want to see authentic writing throughout the application. Is there a place for AI to kind of help generate an idea? I mean, I think that's valid. I would love to rely on an essay and believe that the student wrote it. When a student is submitting their application, they're actually kind of signing off, attesting to the fact that all that they've had in there is authentically theirs. And I do think it's helpful for teachers and counselors, especially those who have incredible, I'm talking about the counselor community now, who have, their caseload is by the hundreds. How do you help a student through the college process when you have, 450 students on your caseload and you're going to write a letter for each of them or each of your, your seniors. And I would imagine that, AI is a helpful tool to help organize maybe, or to help, I believe that the content from a teacher or a counselor is authentic. I think the content, what they want to say about a student is true. How it is put together in the letter form, maybe they had help with that. I don't know. I think we will, it's something that we're gonna, it's here to stay, I think. I had a friend just a couple of weeks ago who used ChatGPT to do an itinerary for a trip we were going to take. And it's like, oh, wow, people are really using this.
It's cool. It works.
It does. It does. Anyway, I think that's all I can say, I think, about my feelings about that.
Great. And what I'm also hearing, a tiny thing that you're saying, is that it seems like, so a recent podcast guest said that it seems like college admission officers are a little more okay with teachers and counselors using it than students using it, which I find interesting.
That is interesting. I think because we're not evaluating them. Mm-hmm. There's something we're getting from what their contribution to the application, right? We want to get a sense of who the students are, right? Mm-hmm. So they can do that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean about, I think the content of their letters is likely legit. They're not using ChatGPT to make up their description of a student. I don't believe. Maybe I'm naive, but if a student is using it and it's not their, let's just say there's a couple of benefits of the essay, or here is, one is to get to know a student, another is to learn how well they write. Mm-hmm. Right. So does it take that away from us? Yeah, probably, because it's not their writing.
Right. Right. One thing you mentioned a couple times was this notion of leveling the playing field. So I'd love to talk about equity for a few minutes, and let's zoom back and sort of take a 35,000-foot view. When you think of the college admission profession, what's working well, and where do you believe that there's still work to be done?
So you know what I think we do really well is I think we have, and so this is going back to, this opinion is based on my experience since 2020. I think we can adapt quickly while keeping students first. And again, we've had, thing after thing after thing after thing that tests that. And so I think we do that well. And I think we do it well because we're keeping students first. And if we are showing up for them and if college access or this idea of fit is important, then it forces us to adapt to what the world is giving us so that we can still serve students in the way that's important to us. So I think the field does that well. So and the other part of your question was where's the opportunity?
Yeah.
You know what I'm reading? Can I mention a book?
Please. Yeah, we love books. I love books.
I'm reading Tony Jack's Class Dismissed. I'm showing this to you because you can see me.
Awesome.
So I haven't finished it, but it is, and it's funny because sometimes some things right, and you just need somebody to tell you it again. and how this book starts is he is essentially talking about how students of different socioeconomic backgrounds were treated during the COVID, students got to get out of here time frame. And what it has pointed out is really the disparity between some of the, how students who are low income and students who were higher income, how they fared with kind of receiving the information that they would have to go home, because of COVID. And some of the assumptions, or actually, it wasn't even I guess it was an assumption, the lack of thought that was put into how, this particular school that he's talking about.
Does he name the school, by the way, or is the school not mentioned?
Sure, he named it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How there was just, not enough attention being given to people who cannot just go home, right? So this is just an example of some of the things that he is writing about and how he begins this book. And I think, so where I'm going with this is that I think the profession needs to continue to just keep an eye on ourselves to make sure that we are walking the talk. Because I think many of us, we talk about belonging, we talk about resources that we have on campus, and, we talk about these great things that are true. But I think what maybe when this chaos happened, in using this example, it really tests whether we have an understanding of what we mean about equity, or what we mean about, how students belong or feel that they belong. And so you have to test it in order to understand whether it's true or not. So I think, I guess, and maybe I'll feel differently as when I finish the book. But I think, along those lines, it's like, okay, I appreciate having this reminder that, we need to continue to keep in mind that, each student is bringing a different experience to our campus. Not everyone is the same, which, yes, we know that. That's what's so crazy about it. We know that. But sometimes when we have actions that prove whether we really understand it, that is where I think there's improvement. We may know it, but do we understand it?
I love what you're saying. I'd love for you to speak to students and parents who might be listening, what would you hope that as they go through this process that they keep in mind? This is sort of like Deanna's words of advice. This is your, if you had a 1 minute, 2 minute column, like what would be your words of advice as students and, their families navigate this process?
Well, one is that there are humans on the other, speaking of AI.
At least for now.
On the other side of the application. I mean, hopefully it stays that way because there'll be a lot of us out of a job. But what that means to them is that there really is somebody who is reading the words and learning about the student. So that's a big thing, I think, for people to understand. And the other thing that I when I have this opportunity, I mentioned, and especially maybe this is coming from me at a women's college, is students, each student, your student, if you're a parent, is already unique. There's nothing that you need to show us or write for us or do for us to stand out. I mean, I think that's the hard thing because sure, we get a lot of applications. There's schools, bigger than Smith, thousands upon thousands of applications. So it's always this idea of, well, how do I stand out? You already stand out. Mm-hmm. Because there's only one you, right? There's only one person when you're not using AI who can write that essay. There's only one person who's going to tell that story because it's your story and tell it like you do. There's only one of you that is going to make a contribution to the classroom or who thinks like you do in your way. You are already unique. And I think, there's so much pressure to try to, appear to be somebody else with the goal of standing out. But you already do that. And so, I say that, I think sometimes girls need to hear that. And so I do try to say that when I can.
Anything else you'd like folks to know as we wrap here?
The one thing that may come to mind, and this has come up maybe on panels or things that I may sit on, or sometimes some things that counselors want to get across. And in support of them, I may talk about how there are, 4,000 schools, 4,000, colleges and universities in this country. And I say that because, sometimes we tend to focus a lot on the same schools and we hear about or read about the same schools. And so I would hate for students to miss like a great opportunity at a great school that maybe they've never heard of, that is really the school that is the match for them or the fit that we talked about before. And they miss it because they don't expand their mind broad enough because we're focused on the same few. And I say that from, not even from, an admission perspective, but from a parent perspective. And, having gone through this process with my daughter, and it's like, well, there's do the research to find the school among all of these that really does speak to you, even if it's not one that you have heard of before, because we're not reading about it in the news all the time. It doesn't get the attention, but it's doing really good work to get students to reach their goals and to graduate and to be, great people and citizens and, contributors to the world. So I think that's like the one piece I think that, sometimes doesn't come up, but I know is important for people to know.
I love that. Thank you, Deanna, so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us.
This was fun. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'll probably invite you again sometime soon.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Hey friends, thanks again for listening. I loved Deanna's advice about finding a wide range of colleges where you can not only get in, but also find your people. I so agree. If you're curious to learn more about how you actually do that, I will link in the show notes to our guide to developing a college list. You'll find that at collegeessayguide.com/podcast. As ever, you can find out what's happening in the college admission world by opting into anything on our website, joining our newsletter, finding out about our upcoming webinars, etc. Or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where we publish videos on the regular. Smash that like button. Be well and stay curious.